Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Hype, Insights for 2025. I'm Dimitris Mertikas. I'm the Key Account Manager at Glander International Banking in Dubai, and I will be your host and moderator for the next approximately 90 minutes. As the title suggests, we're giving you a break from the ongoing sustainability talk. Don't get me wrong, green fuels and EU ETS are very important, but we have to admit that they dominated every conference, every webinar and coffee conversation lately. Today, we are shifting gears on topics that we believe are just as interesting for your business in 2025. Now, we have put together an exciting lineup with 3 experts in their fields who intend to tackle everything from the oil market outlook and the new ISO 2024 standard to the transformative impact of AI in shipping. Regardless of where your special interest lies, I'm sure that you'll walk away today with insights you can act on. So here's our plan. Each speaker will have 20 minutes to present, and after the presentation, we will have a 10 minutes Q&A session. You are welcome to submit your questions anytime during the presentation or at the end of it via the Q&A box that you will see at the top of your screen. You can choose at that time to post your question anonymously. I will help moderate and ensure we address as many as possible questions we can during each segment and the allocated time that we have. So let's get started. Our first speaker is Arne Rasmussen. He is the Chief Analyst and the Head of Research at Global Risk Management. He has 23 years of experience in the research department at Danske Bank and holds a Master of Economics degree from the University of South Denmark. Arne is regularly quoted in local and international financial media. Today, he will dive with us into the 2025 oil and bunker outlook, including whether new US sanctions will shake things up and if OPEC might finally hit the reset button on their strategy. Over to you, Arne.
Thank you, Dimitris. Yeah, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are sitting in the world. I don't think we have anyone on from the US. I guess Trump might be awake, but that's all. Oil and bunker market update. I think that if we look back at 2024, was very much about demand concerns, especially related to China, to a certain degree also related to Europe, US, the global economy, higher interest rates, the economy slowing down. I think some of these demand concerns are still out there, but actually China was looking better in Q4. I guess the US will actually see some recovery the next couple of quarters, also from the new government, and lower interest rates in Europe might even help also Europe to be in a bit better place this year. But of course, growth is very much still related to Asia, Middle East. But this year, as I will discuss today, I think we are in the oil market, the bunker market, actually moving away from these demand concerns. Unfortunately, we are moving to supply concerns instead. And I think that will be the sort of key side of the equation to follow this year. But if we look at, and maybe I just one word, GRM is a sister company of Glander. We are part of the same group, and we are the financial arm of the group. So we do financial hedging, swaps, and so on in various energy markets. It has actually been a relatively strong start to this year after the somewhat dull last year. And we can see how the Brent price have been trading in a more and more narrow trading range for the last half a year, and then we kind of broke out this year, or maybe just around Christmas last year. So what I already alluded to, what is sort of the key themes for the oil market: sanctions and tariffs, OPEC policy, US supply, drill baby drill, reopening of the Red Sea. It seems to be very close. If not, you can maybe already say it's reopened, not officially, of course. Less demand concern, we talked about that. And then something I think very relevant, of course, for the shipping community, these high sulfur fuel oil strength that we are seeing in the market. A strength I, by the way, believe will tend to continue for the rest of the year, especially as the summer on the northern hemisphere approaches, where we have seasonally strong demand from bitumen, demand from power consumption in the Middle East. If we start with the sanctions, of course, the inauguration of Trump, we're now on day 3. A lot of news coming out. Actually, there's one I just thought about this morning. He hasn't said much about Iran after he became president. Does that indicate that he will sort of ease the sanctions on Iran? I don't think so, but it's a good thing just to have a look at what is the export from Iran. Remember, when Trump was president for the first time, Iran exported well above 2 million barrels a day. Remember, the global market is just above 100 million barrels a day, so roughly 2%. Then the U.S. withdraw from the nuclear negotiation with the Iran, the UN, EU, and strong sanctions were introduced, and Iranian export actually fell close to zero, or maybe a quarter, 500,000 barrels a day. That continued during the first 2 years of the Biden administration. Then came the war in Ukraine. Iran was able to resume its export. Maybe the U.S. turned its blind eye to it. Maybe Iran became better at getting its oil out. I don't know, but that's where we are today. In a way, I think Biden didn't really dare to tighten the sanction because he was afraid of rising oil prices. If there's anything you can lose a U.S. election on, it's high gasoline pressure. Before the election, the Trump and his administration, or incoming administration, talked a lot about this maximum pressure strategy that they would like to introduce. I think they will do this. I think it will be much more difficult than people think for Trump to introduce all these tariffs he's talking about. Here is something that he might be able to actually introduce, something he has promised his voters. And if he managed to step up U.S. production, there might also be room for it without sending oil prices sky high. So I think this maximum pressure strategy will return. And I think it's likely that we will take away maybe 500,000, maybe 1 million barrel of Iranian export, and export mainly heading for China. But that doesn't really matter for the global market. But that said, it is much more difficult to do this, especially because a lot of the Iranian oil goes directly to China, making it much more difficult. But maximum pressure strategy on Iran, keep an eye on that. That is a key factor this year. New sanctions on Russia. Do remember that the sanction on Russia introduced when the war started was actually not designed to keep Russian oil off the market. Yes, the EU is not buying any Russian oil, but it's bought in Asia, Middle East, Africa, and so on. And that is inside any sanctions. That what the sanction did was they were trying to put more cost on Russia. They had to transport it more. They had to sell it under the price cap. But basically, Russian export production has been limited by the membership of the OPEC Plus, not by the sanction. To a certain degree, that changed with the latest Biden sanctions, where I think 181 vessels from the Shadow Fleet were sanctioned, and together with sanctions from the UK, the EU, I think more than 250 vessels are now sanctioned. They also put sanctions on 2 major Russian oil companies, Russian insurance companies, and so on. And there might come more EU sanctions. But it all doesn't really matter because it's all up to Trump. Will he keep the sanctions? Remember, he can actually remove them by a presidential decree. I think these first 3 days have shown that I think they will stay in place. And yesterday, Trump actually tweeted or put on his own through social media that he is ready to tighten tariffs, taxes towards Russia. I think that will also include sanctions. He's trying to use this at putting pressure on Putin. I don't think a ceasefire or a peace deal is imminent, but a ceasefire is imminent and this can drag on, it also means that I think these sanctions will stay in place and they could actually be tightened. I think especially in Q2 and Q3, we could see a combination of Iranian and Russian sanction having an impact on the market. There's also a lot of talk about tariffs on Canada, Mexico, 25%. A lot of numbers is flying around. Do remember, Canada is a very important exporter to the US, that important exporter of heavy sour crude oil. If they put tariffs on, maybe Trump will say it doesn't apply to energy, then Canada can say, no, we'll put an export tariffs on. But nevertheless, this could really create a lot of uncertainty in the market. It's difficult for Canada to get this oil out if it's not done by pipeline. The US might try to source oil from all US refineries from other sources and so on. It's all related to heavy sour crude oil from Canada. In respect of Mexico, there's also some high sulfur fuel oil coming to the global market. That will, on the other hand, enter the global market. If the US is putting sanctions on it, then the US will try to source that fuel oil from other sources. But let's see what happens with these sanctions. February 1 is sort of a new key date. They didn't come day one. Let's see if it really end out that way. But it's certainly something that creates a lot of uncertainty, and it's not a one-way direction for prices. Venezuela, I didn't even put a slide on that. He actually mentioned that Trump that they might stop buying oil from Venezuela. It's a bit unclear whether they will allow it going to other countries or not, whether it will be sanctioned or not. But let's leave that aside. Next thing, of course, global oil production outside OPEC Plus. It's very much Guyana, Canada, US, Brazil, and especially a lot of focus on the US. A lot of deregulation, a lot of regulation has already been scrapped now. They have introduced this energy emergency in the US to take away regulation, to take away some of the presidential decrees that Biden introduced. Some of the latest thing he did was actually to do some decrees that had an environmentally angle that is more difficult for the Trump administration to remove them. That is what the administration is now trying to do. There will not be more oil from US tomorrow or the day after. I don't think he will be able to impact production that much this year. This is very much a 2026, 2027 story. If we ask the US Department of Energy, of course, done under the Biden administration, they were actually quite cautious on the ability for the US to kickstart production and really jumpstart it. But do notice that US oil production has been rising very rapidly for the last 15 years. This is under the 8 years of Obama. We're moving from like 5.5 million barrels to close to 10 million barrels. Then came Trump in, again, a new move higher, came the Corona, and then Biden, a new move higher. Oil production also rising under Biden. US will continue to increase its oil production, and it will go faster under Trump. But he can only sort of control federal land. He cannot control whether oil companies are actually willing to invest, because if they fear that oil prices will collapse to $50, they will be more happy to put their cash flow to the investors and not invest them. But I think it's more 26, 27 story. He cannot do much to change the oil market balance for the next 6 to 9 months. OPEC is another question here. This is the old OPEC, not OPEC Plus. This is the capacity. This is the oil production. So OPEC has a lot of spare capacity, especially the Emirates. Saudis have a lot of capacity, and of course they would like to have that out producing. So they have introduced this plan of scaling oil back into the market. It has been delayed for 3 times now, and it's supposed to start here 1st of April, but it's a very slow sort of phasing in of higher oil production. I think the first month is 120,000 barrel, not a lot. Actually, before the new sanctions on Russia, I thought they would delay it once again because there's not room for it. Now there is probably room for the OPEC oil. And of course, let's say Trump actually tightened sanctions significantly on both Russia and Russia and Iran, really doing everything he can. then I'm pretty sure that OPEC will actually add more oil. It keeps a lid on how high oil prices could go. I have a hard time seeing oil prices going above 90 this year. On the other hand, OPEC have shown that they are not happy when oil prices go below 70. And if we are moving in that in the low 70s, I think they will delay again the plans to add more oil, and they could even be discussing cutting production. So oil is still capped in a range, probably from the low 70s to low 90s, around 90s. If we go a bit further into the products, gas oil crack, marine gas oil, this is ICE gas oil crack, the difference between a barrel of gas oil and a barrel of Brent. Was very low during the pandemic. Of course, there was no demand also jet fuel, which is a part of this. Very low demand here under the pandemic. Then came the war in Ukraine, and it spiked because Russia is a big exporter. It has basically normalized. Now we're back to a crack as we saw before the pandemic. I actually believe there's a risk on the upside here for this crack moving higher. So keep an eye on that. Also a crack spread very sensitive to what's going on with Russia. Russia is a large exporter of diesel, which is of course related to gas oil and marine gas oil and so on. The Chinese stimuli, what will that impact? How will it impact refinery runs in Asia and China, India, if we get more tougher sanctions on Russian oil? I believe that jet fuel demand will stay pretty strong, and if we get a stronger global economy, or maybe not as weak as last year, this is actually also supportive. So I see a risk of that marine gas oil could actually rise on its own, or ICE gas oil, so to speak. So that's something to keep an eye on, not just the Brent price, of course, this crack. For the maritime sector, of course, VLSFO and high sulfur fuel oil is very important. Again, it is the spread to Brent, also the crack, and of course we have the high sulfur fuel oil in Singapore. We have it in Rotterdam, the two major benchmark, and fuel oil is trading with a discount to Brent. The discount, if we move 1 year back or late 2023, was almost $15 of discount. Note that the discount has become smaller and smaller throughout last year, and it's actually further dropped here at the beginning of the year. And especially high sulfur fuel in Singapore has become relatively expensive compared to also where it trades in Rotterdam. So there's a big spread between prices in Singapore and Rotterdam. I think it's something we could see continuing going forward. But why have we seen this support to high sulfur fuel oil? There's been strong demand from the maritime sector going south the Cape, the closure of the Red Sea. Strong demand. We see that when we look at port sales in Singapore and Rotterdam and so on. More scrubbers, so more use of high sulfur fuel oil. We have seen quite a strong demand in the Middle East. There was a high cooling demand this year. There's an impact on tariffs on activity here. It could mean that activity has been higher ahead of incoming tariffs. There's also some supply factors here having an impact. Of course, the sanction seem to be removing, and also the OPEC Plus cuts are mainly removing heavy sour crude oil. That's where we have the highest residual oil, hence highest amount of high sulfur fuel oil. So that's part of the OPEC Plus policy. New refineries don't go to El Sour might also mean that we have actually they are producing less residuals if we look at sort of what's in the barrel there. I think the strength in the high sulfur oil market is set to continue, though the reopening of the Red Sea, which I think is relatively imminent, could be something that would take away some of the demand. But the tendency to use scrubbers and so on is a structural thing that I strongly believe will continue. It also means that if you look at the so-called high 5 spread, what is that? The difference between the price of a metric ton of high sulfur fuel oil relatively to a metric ton of VLSFO, that this spread will continue to narrow, going lower, meaning that high sulfur fuel oil stays relatively expensive relatively to VLSFO. If we should just take a view on what should you think about bunker prices, what should we think about oil prices in general, I think we could actually move higher in Q2 and Q3. That's where the sanctions will really kick in. If they come on Iran, if the Russian sanctions continue, I'm not sure the market is prepared for that. Q2 and Q3 are also stronger seasonally, and then I think market should actually ease later in the year as more supply is coming to the market. We'll start to see the supply, especially from the US and so on. So in a nutshell, Brent maybe from the low 70s to around 90, maybe low 90s, slightly higher prices in Q2 and Q3, and then things start to add downward pressure as supply fears return to the market. So nothing dramatic here. I don't think we are in for like $50 or prices above $100. I think that's too much spare capacity out there. From OPEC, they will cap the outside, but they're also ready to cap the downside. Of course, what could trigger a complete turnaround? A global recession, for example, if the tariffs are really hurting growth, that could be some. If you want to know more about what we are doing, feel free to reach out. You can also sign up for the research we are doing here at GROM. Over to you, Dimitris. Thank you for giving me these 20 minutes to present on your webinar.
Thank you very much, Arne. A lot of opportunities and challenges for sure lie ahead. Before we go to some questions, I would like to remind everybody that in case they're not familiar, because I'm receiving some of them directly, to post a question, you need to check at the top of the screen. There is a button that says Q&A. So there you can start a discussion. This is how you place your question and post anonymously. Now, let's start with a few questions and see what's on everybody's mind. We see a question that's three questions in one, actually. First of all, I'm reading it well. We talked a lot about what will be Trump's policy, and pretty much the market is focused on that at the moment. But what other factors are playing a role? What's the role of US dollar at the current stage and the currency exchange with how it will impact the oil prices moving forward?
The dollar? Yeah. I think if you woke some of my, let's say, older colleagues up in the middle of the night, I guess also some of your colleagues, Dimitri, being active in the oil market, they would say a stronger dollar goes hand in hand with a lower oil price. That used to be sort of the normal correlation, but it's actually changed the last 2 years. So when we have seen periods where the dollar has gone stronger, the oil prices has actually also gone stronger. I think it's been related to that the dollar is very much at the moment in control of how good is the US economy. Are they going to put up rates there, the Fed or not? And I think that is something that will continue, that when we see the stronger dollar is actually positive for oil prices. But we could also be in for that maybe currencies are not that important anymore for dollars. But I think one important thing here to say is that if you are exposed to currency exposure, a lot of shipping companies are not, because everything is in dollar. But if you are, then be aware that don't count on this traditional correlation that if the dollar goes up, oil prices go down. It has not worked the last 2 years.
Another question on the same segment is, will the Trump administration continue to replenish the SPR? I mean, will there be the demand? There is a discussion that US will start replenishing again the strategic reserves. Will that be offer some support to the prices in the
Trump has actually said that he will continue, that he will actually accelerate the refilling of the strategic reserve. Remember, the strategic reserves are the reserves that the US have in other countries, and they have the reserves in case of oil supply somehow being cut off. It could be a natural disaster, but it could, of course, also be an OPEC decision to cut off supplies significantly, as we saw in the first and the second oil crisis. But he has said he's ready to refill them at a faster rate. That will, by the way, be quite difficult because it's not technically possible. But he will continue to take away oil if he sticks to this. I think he could change his mind if oil prices, for some reason, start to rise. I'm pretty sure he will use this as a tool to mitigate higher prices. That is exactly what Biden did. I'm sure that Trump will be ready to do that as well.
Mm-hmm. And another question. Now, talking about strategy, I think this refers also to your last slide where you said what is the projection for the next year that the market, at least for this year, for the market, the next quarters will be rather bullish. There is a lot of volatility in the market, right? I mean, it all has to do also with what will Trump do with sanctions to Russia. I mean, the farewell gift that Biden left for Russia. Considering that in the previous year we were seeing, I guess, we're talking about a surplus in oil, and now we're talking potential for exactly the opposite. So what would be a recommended strategy? I mean, from your side, what's your point of view for a buyer today? That should we wait and see? Should we buy from now and lock a price, or what is your view?
I think from a very, very short term, I think there's a correction the last couple of days. I think it could maybe have a few more days. That's very short-sighted to go. There's a lot of speculative long position and all that. But I think as a hedger, as a consumer, what you should be aware of is, I think, the risk of prices going higher, especially in Q2 and Q3. And the market will be sensitive to, for example, suddenly news on new sanctions on Iran, for example, as I said, a bit in the background. So yes, I think it's sort of prudent risk management to have some lock in prices forward, maybe 3, maybe 6 months or whatever you are doing. There's also in many curves actually a bit of what you call backwardation, that the forward price is slightly lower. It's a bit less in some of the bunker products, but there's still some backwardation, so the price is slightly lower, especially if you go maybe to 1 year or something like that. So that's also something to look at. So yes, I would recommend to hedge at least exposure in Q2 and Q3.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to another question now regarding tariffs. We're asked, how do you see potential tariffs impacting oil and oil products, fuel oil from Canada and Mexico? What if we see a reopening of the Red Sea?
I think the Red Sea is probably relatively close. I think, as I said, under the high sulfur fuel oil discussion, it could take away some pressure because it will take away some demand. It will also tend to sort of make the so-called east-west arbitrage slightly lower, because it will simply be cheaper to transport oil from Singapore to Rotterdam or from Houston, or especially on that route from Singapore to Rotterdam or vice versa. So if there's a price differential there, it will be easier to sort of arbitrage that away. So in that respect, negative for prices, the reopening, it also makes it easier to deliver some of the ice gas oil, the marine gas oil, to especially Rotterdam. And you could actually see when this really starts up, if it really is an official open, insurance companies accept that you go through the Red Sea, that's sort of at a certain time supplies, especially in the Rotterdam and the Ara area, coming both through the Red Sea and vessels going around Africa coming in at the same time. But that will be a sort of a short-term effect. And the other question was Canada and Mexico, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. For the
tariffs. We almost need a full seminar to explain that. But really, of course, it is a lot of oil at stake here, especially from Canada to the US, that they will have a hard time exporting, because a lot of the Canadian oil is, so to speak, landlocked. So they have a hard time getting it out of Canada. So they either have to sell it at a discount or accept they will keep it. But it could also mean that the US refineries will look, as I said, for other oils. In respect of Mexico, they are quite an important export of residual high sulfur fuel oil. It could actually mean that more of that is coming to the rest of the world market, putting down pressures in Rotterdam, Singapore, Middle East, and so on. But there's a lot of moving parts there.
Mm-hmm. Of course, just to elaborate a bit more on the tariffs, do you think, I mean, okay, as a view at least, that Trump will, go with what you said on the tariffs, or it's more like a bargaining chip? I mean, we saw for China, for example, that comparing to the campaign, the tariffs that he announced yesterday or the day before were 10%. I mean, quite a smaller number. So is it something that he wants to use to get something out of it, or he will actually follow through?
I think before the election, he was very firm saying that it will be day one. There was a lot of things going to happen day one, and it didn't. And I think one of the reasons why the S&P 500, the US equity market, did an all-time high yesterday was actually that the market is now sort of buying into the view that the tariffs are in fact this negotiation tool that he has been talking about. And I think in respect of the Chinese tariffs, which are of course very important for the whole shipping industry, maybe they are more of a negotiation than we thought. We all know that Elon Musk has a huge interest in China. We saw Trump yesterday saying that he could actually accept the TikTok and so on. It seems to be that the stance towards China is maybe a less tough than it was before the election. But we know this can change overnight. And if we get these 25% or 60% or whatever has been up in the air, it is of course a concern. I think most economists will say that will be a significant negative push to the global economy. I think at the moment we're actually seeing a pickup because people are trying to get goods into the US before any tariffs. That could also be the case, for example, with Canadian oil, as export as much before any tariffs might kick in.
I think we have time for one last question. I see. If OPEC go through with the plan of adding more oil on April 1st, will they then go through with the plan for the full 8-month schedule? I mean, first of all, will OPEC add oil in the market as we see it now, and will they?
Before as I said, before the Biden introduced the sanction on Russia, and which Trump seems to be continue, I was pretty certain that the OPEC would delay it once again. Now I think there is opening a window for them to add a bit more oil. Does that mean that they will continue the plan for the next 18 months? And no, that will be up for discussion. I think at least every third month. Should we continue? Should we stop it? Or should we even take some oil off the market again? So it's a bit like when we discuss whether the central banks will hike or lower interest rates. Then every time there's an OPEC gathering, we will be discussing, will they continue adding more oil? Will they take a pause? And if oil prices for some reason drops, I think they will also be ready to take some of the oil actually back into what will be a lot of focus on, I think, in the sort of watching OPEC action will be focused on how the quota compliance goes on. It seems like the quota compliance has been relatively high in December, and of course that also tends to tighten the market. But for now, I think it's likely that they will actually go through with adding a bit more oil, but it's relatively modest for the first 3 months. Remember, they changed the plan. It was no longer over 1 year. They're going to add these 2 million extra barrels a day. It's now over 18 months.
No, at this point, we need to close, I think, the Q&A segment. Thank you very much, Arne, for joining us today, for your insights and your presentation.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure. For the questions, I wanted to say that we are always available and we can address any questions offline as well after the webinar. Now, moving on. Hello. We have Steffen Kortegaard with us. He's a technical manager at Bunker Holding. With 40 years of industry experience and active involvement in the ISO 2024 work group, Steffen is rightfully recognized as an authority on the subject. He will be talking about the 2024 ISO 8216 and 8217 edition, what's new, what's improved, and what's still a work in progress. And he will also explore whether this update is enough to support shipping sustainability transition and whether it might become the go-to fuel standard for the future. Again, remember to post your questions at the Q&A during the presentation or at the time we will say that the Q&A opens. And now over to you, Steffen.
Hi all. and thank you very much, Dimitris, and thanks to Glander for inviting me to this event. My name is Steffen Kortegaard, and I represent the Bunker One, which is the physical brand of the Bunker Holding Group, and by that a sister company to Glander. I'm actually sitting in Denmark, and you might be able to see out of my window. It is snowing today here. You can see, I'll just have to shift the slides here. You can see on this map where we have physical locations. And today we have around 50 tankers on the dots you can see here, all serving our clients. Today's topics will be a brief historical review of ISO 8216 and 8217, and then what is new in the 2024 edition compared to the previous editions. And last, I will try to walk you through a bunker request, an order, and order confirmation. In the late 70s and 80s, the refineries introduced a lot of new technology in form of cracking devices. And we saw residual fuel oil becoming much different from the past, where straight-run fuels were the only residuals on the market. On straight-run fuel, the viscosity equal quality, but it's much different on the cracked fuels. Why there were a need for a new standard for the shipping industry, and that was then introduced back in 1987. This has been revised in intervals of about 5 years. However, not necessarily all well adopted in the industry. The 1996 edition was not very popular. On the other side, the 2005 edition is still in use some places in the world. First to the ISO 8216, which is probably not so known, but this is the standard stipulating the brand names. DM stands for distillate for marine use, and then we have the grades from A to C. RM stands for residual for marine use, and here we also have grades from A to K. In the new edition, 24 edition, two new series of brands are introduced. RMH for residual fuel with higher sulfur content than 0.5%, and RF are residual fuels blended with FAME blended with biofuel in form of FAME. When I fill my Volkswagen diesel car, I go to the gas station, and I have normally max 2 filling tabs to choose from. But when you have to purchase fuel for your ships, you have now 19 different qualities to choose from. You will experience or you will see some of the quality has disappeared. For instance, RMD quality, which is today actually used a lot for ULSFO products. And this product will then fall under the RME quality in the new edition. Looking on the ISO 8217, here we have the 24 edition and the 70 edition. And you can see that the 24 edition now have 42 pages compared to the previous edition with 22 pages. So not only the brand names in ISO 8216 has grown significantly, also the volume and complexity of the standard has grown significantly. This is the two tables which were in the old editions, where the qualities were arranged serial, so to say. A ship owner would describe in his specification to a shipyard which fuel the ship should be configured to burn. typically for newer ships, are AMK quality. Then the owner could just order AMK for the total lifetime of his ship, of course also stipulating the sulfur content depending of the trading area. The supplier could then offer any quality from DMA to AMK because they would all comply with the AMK quality. In the new edition, we have 4 tables and now in parallel, meaning the owner now needs to specify a number of fuel for his or her new buildings. For instance, my vessel should be able to burn DMB from table 1, from table 2, AMK 500.5 and AMK 500.01, and from table 3, IF 500 up to B30, and from table 4, AMK 700H if it is a scrubber-fitted vessel. I know when able to burn AMK 700, it most probably is capable of burning all other grades, but there is no directly contact between the tables. So now we come to what is new in the 2024 edition, and I will start with clause 3, where there is an attempt to identify and define the everyday use terms and abbreviations. The idea is not very clear. We already have ISO 8216 stipulating the brand names of the different fuels, and the abbreviations are not used later in this standard necessarily. For example, VLSFO is later in the standard called residual marine fuel with sulfur content below or at 0.5% by mass. And a very common used abbreviation today is ULSD, which apparently has been forgotten. I always suggest to stick to the official names from the ISO 8216 brands. Then we know all what we're talking about and we will avoid any misunderstandings. Clause 4 is not new, but I will read here. Sampling of a fuel is an important part of the fuel quality verification and should be carried out in accordance with ISO 13739 or equivalent standard. The sample shall be representative for the entire quantity of the fuel loaded onto the receiving ship and may be taken in any location agreed between the parties. I would like to emphasize this clause because we often see conflicts here between the ISO specification or the ISO standard and the terms and conditions governing a bunker sale. In bunker 1, we have BIMCO terms as our standard terms, and there is no conflict. But be aware if you purchase from other terms and conditions. Clause 5, allowing up to 100% biofuel blends. It is, of course, very positive and one of the drivers, if not the main driver for developing this new ISO edition. But I find it very unambitious only to include FAME and only FAME according to the automotive standard EN 14214 or the American version D7 or 6751. Most engines are actually able to burn triglyceride more or less directly, so why spend energy and money for treatment? Many other sustainable feedstocks are also fit for marine use and are already widespread used in the industry. Clause 5.3 on organic chlorides is very positive, seen in the light of the engine damages we experienced in Singapore a few years ago. The threshold of 50 ppm can of course be discussed and is one of the main reasons for the 24 edition is still not commonly accepted in the market. The Singapore damages were all about 2000 ppm of organic chlorides. And in the ISO group, we saw the supplier suggesting 250 ppm as a threshold, and the engine maker suggested 0 ppm as a threshold. and finally they compromise on the 50 ppm. However, today many places in the world we see levels around 100 ppm, which will be off-spec according to this standard, but still considered harmless for engines and equipment. Clause 6.8 is a technicality on test method depending on the viscosity of the product. I suggest also to test cleanliness. You know, the coffee filter test. It's very low-cost test, and it will give you a good hint of the stability of the product you purchase. 6.1.8 specific energy cannot be calculated from biofuels as we're used to from fossil fuels. Thus, a test in a bomb calorimeter is needed. This is a very expensive test, and that's why we in Bunker 1 have set a default value on our bioproducts to 37 megajoule per kilogram. Then we are sure not to over-describe the energy content. But default values are actually not in compliance with this standard. Clause 5 or clause 6.1.9 cetane index. It's the same for this clause. The cetane index cannot be calculated, but need also for bioproducts, but need to be tested in a specific special engine. And this is also extremely expensive. But as FAME, according to the EN 14214 standard, minimum will have a cetane number of 51. This seems as a huge overkill. Generally, we can say that biofuels have extremely good ignition properties. Clause 10 is the clause where we see the four new or the tables with the two new tables. Table 1 is not much different from what we know from the 17 edition, except covering FAME content in the DF grades up to B100. Table 2 is residual marine fuel with a maximum of 0.5% sulfur, also called VLSFO or ULSFO from the clause 3 of this standard. Table 3 covers residual blends with FAME up to B100. And notice for table 3, this cover all sulfur content from 0.1 to any sulfur content. And table 4 is marine fuel with sulfur content above 0.5%. You will notice that the three tables for residual products are much alike, except for the FAME content and sulfur, of course. Here you see parts of the three tables for the residual fuels. Notice the top line, that it is a general requirement that all clauses from 5 to 10 is a part of this table. This means that one cannot exclude the text in the clauses just by referring to a table. Now it's so to say, take it all or nothing. You can see all grades not only have a maximum viscosity now, but also minimum viscosities are introduced. I don't know the reason behind making the three residual tables compared to one. In the best case, I find it unfortunate and maybe more directly stupid. Also, introducing minimum viscosities seems very strange, and I cannot find one single technical argument supporting this. It was supported from one of the big Danish engine manufacturers with the argument that the chief engineer should know the viscosity of the product he could expect to get. An argument I partly agree in, but this information could have been given in many, many other ways. Then we come to the annexes. I will not go deeply into that because the annexes are just of informative character and as such not a part of the standard which has to be followed. but of more informative character, educational and good practices. For instance, look up if you have a fuel claim, how should your chief engineer collect the data, etc. And then I will try to walk you through a bunker request, how it could look like with this new standard, with an example with a vessel which is scrubber fitted and capable to burn RMK 700. And the owner, he wants to buy a B20 product, maybe because he has to fulfill the requirement of Fuel Maritime Fit for 55 or the IMO CII clauses. It will be relatively complicated, but a request could look like he wants to buy X metric tons RF 500 B20 at any sulfur content. And if he wants to benchmark his prices against a fossil B0, he could also request X metric tons RMK 700 at any sulfur content. The supplier cannot just offer the requested qualities because the product he might have in stock are most probably off-spec according to this 2024 edition. But he could offer what he has on the shelves as X tons of RF20 B20 0.5% sulfur at a given price, and he has RMK 500 also 0.5% sulfur at another given price. Then the buyer has to consider if that is okay or not and confirm this in his order. This might be relatively easy for most owners, but remember many fuel buyers are charterers with low technical shipping knowledge. And also this will have a spread, the offer given from 2 to 500 centistokes. So actually the chief engineer doesn't really know the viscosity anyway. If the buyer of this product, he will give free hands to the supplier to deliver a better product like we're used to from the 17 ISO edition, a request will be very complicated and look like he wants to request X metric tons RF 500 B20 any sulfur content or any lower grades of B20 any sulfur content from table 3 or table 1. And if he still wants to benchmark with a fossil product, he should also ask for an RMK 700H, any sulfur content, or any lower grades from table 1, 2, and 4. Then this should actually also be included in time charter parties if the time charter party stipulates ISO 8217 newest edition. The offer given can of course be the same, and in this case that will be off-spec or it will be on-spec, but it will be a very complicated request order and order confirmation process. And they still apply a viscosity spread from 2 to 500 centistokes. I can see I have made a typing error here, but it's up to 500 centistokes. Last, my conclusion. The more complex fuel supplies are becoming, the more beneficial it will be for the skilled supplier. The ISO 8217 edition up to 2024 have all been serial, meaning the buyer could just request the product the vessel was built to handle, and the supplier could deliver a better quality if the given request was not able. This is not the case anymore. The chief engineer should of course know the viscosity of the given product, but that could be addressed in much more elegant way, for instance by a demand of viscosity reporting. Technically, I see no reasons for stipulating minimum viscosities. It is very positive that organic chlorides are included in this standard, and of course the threshold limit could be discussed. The industry is already miles ahead this standard using other sustainable fuels than EN 14 to 14 complying bioproducts. I think this standard will end as a small bracket in the history of A217. And that was all from me, Dimitri, and back to you,
Thank
please.
you very much, Stefan. And thank you for breaking it down for us. For sure, it's a bit more complex than we would hope for. Let's go to some questions that we have. We have time for a couple of questions. First one, we have seen a lot of problem, some assess from our guests, with cashew nut shell liquid added to fuel in ARA last year. Would the new ISO specs allow the analysis to show and prove the problematic without having to do a GCMS test?
No, there's no GCMS test included in the new standard at all. But if there is cashew nut shell oil in the blended into the product, it will be off spec according to the new standard, because only FAME according the automotive standard is allowed. But as such, cashew nut shell oil is not mentioned anywhere.
Not mentioned.
Neither the
another
GCMS
question is,
test. Yeah.
What is the reason behind that FAME must be according to a standard, which I understand says it's an automotive standard?
That's a good question. And correct that the European EN standard and the American ASTM standard are developed for the automotive industry. The reason is most probably that there are some big players who have invested heavily in biofuel production, and as such has a very strong commercial background for only introducing the FAME products. That's my guess. I cannot see any other reason for that, because we have so many other bioproducts and alcohols, for instance, which could be introduced.
One more question we have, is there a maximum sulfur content level of 3.5% in the newest ISO 8217 standard?
No, there's no maximum sulfur content in the fuel standard as such, except for table 2, of course, which only cover the VLSFO and ULSFO. I think that the 3.5 standard was a world cap before the new MARPOL edition came into force in 2020. But if you have a scrubber-fitted vessel, it's up to the scrubber manufacturer, so to say, to decide the sulfur content of the fuel. I know that in the EU directive, sulfur directive, there is still a cap of 3.5% sulfur for closed loop scrubbing, or for open loop scrubbing. You are only allowed to open loop scrub up to 3.5% sulfur. If you go above 3.5%, you have to use closed loop scrubbing. I don't know why this is introduced in the EU sulfur directive, because eventually the sulfur will end in the seawater anyway.
And with that, we will need to close the Q&A at this stage. Thank you very much, Stefan, for joining us today. And
Thank
for
you. You're welcome.
taking us through the new ISO standard. Now, our final speaker today is Arne Butzbach. He's the Director of Architecture and Intelligence at Bunker Holding. His focus is on aligning technological initiatives with business goals to enable business agility and strategic decision-making in the Bunker Holding Group. Arne will take us on a journey into the transformative role of AI in the maritime industry and explore its impact on the shipping value chain and the emerging trends in the industry's future. Arne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, and thanks to everyone who stuck around. I'm always extremely excited when IT is getting invited into the room with such smart business people. So it's a big topic, right? AI and maritime, and I think we haven't really yet discovered what it all means. But today I want to quickly try to wrap your head around what does AI mean? What does generative AI mean? How can you and your company start to actually create some value using some of these technologies? How can you go about accelerating the adoption of these technologies in your own organization. And then lastly, I want to finish up with a couple of thoughts around how we see the current evolvement in the industry, but also how it's going to probably change over the coming years. So let's dive into it. Firstly, just a quick explanation, because I think there is a lot of mystery around AI and what does it actually mean. I think we all believe that it will be able to solve all of our problems, and some might even think that it will take their jobs. I think I can calm you down. It won't take your jobs, at least not anytime soon. I think what it means right now to us is two things, right? If you have the current state of the technology that allows us to actually create value, and then we have the potential of the technology. When we talk about AI, simply speaking, is a system that can perform tasks that resembles what a human does. We are definitely not there yet. I think the closest we see to these type of systems is self-driving cars, right? And we don't see that many of them on the road yet, but it will come. If we then look a little bit to the right, and then you look at generative AI, I think that's what has exploded over the last couple of years. It's all over the place. This is a very specific branch of artificial intelligence where we talk about the creation of new content such as pictures, text, music, sound, and it's really something that has been blowing up, right? Let's start by diving a little bit into it, because I think when you talk about these categories, let's just go one ahead. Let's start with the text, right? Text is something I think most of us have already had experience with. It's either through ChatGPT or Copilot, if you are using that technology in your organization. We now have a sparring partner amongst us. Now it's almost like having a second colleague, right? But apart from that, this colleague knows everything about everything. So and the hard task is to actually tell if it's true what your colleague is telling you or not. So there is with working with the text currently, some of these systems are built so that it has to answer you. So whenever you ask something, then it has to give you a response. And that also means that if a good example was not that long ago, if you were asking what year, for example, a famous person died, it would tell you that the person died a year, no matter if that person is still alive. So you really need to be able to fact check whatever it tells you. Then looking at technologies like sound, music, I think this is something that is extremely interesting. We've used this example internally. We produce quite a lot of content, and it's extremely important to be on top of what happens in our industry, and that happens on a lot of medias, right? And then when do you even have time to catch up on these medias in your organization? That it's really hard to reserve that time, but many of us commute. So by using sound, you can now listen in to a wrap up of the day over a podcast, and the technology is here. So now, for example, this example we have here is an example made from using some of Google's technology. Now you can just throw in some text, and then it sounds like an actual podcast where two people are debating a topic around the content, and it makes it really interesting. So it's something that already now is out there that can help you either work smarter or use your time best. And as you can hear, it sounds very, very real. Moving on, pictures. I think that's still something that is evolving quite a lot, but it's actually starting to become quite effective. I think animations are still figuring its way through, but if you go to realistic pictures, then it's quite accurate today. I think what you then need to navigate in is how realistic do you really want these type of pictures to be. And many of these solutions that are out there today make sure that a person, for example, has 6 fingers and not 5, so you can tell the difference. And that's the kind of things you need to wrap your head around whenever you use these technologies. How realistic do you actually want it to be, so that it doesn't represent you could say not represent reality. Then I think just throwing it all together, I think many of us have seen deepfake. It's all over the place, and it's becoming harder and harder to tell what's true or not in the future. And some of the examples we have seen is, for example, the one with Elon Musk posting a video with Kamala Harris, right? And it wasn't even her. So we can now replicate sound, visual, and it all goes into one, right? So I think what we will see over time is that the ability to tell the difference between truth or not, it will be very hard. But at the moment, it is still quite easy to spot, especially if you focus on the eyes of a person during one of these videos. You will easily see that there's like a small glint in it. So it doesn't really yet work optimal, but they will solve for all of this. So news and medias will definitely be a very interesting thing to follow in the future. Then becoming a little bit more low practical, because I also promised to give you something that you can maybe bring back home and take into use. And I think some of the tools that are out there and are extremely, you can say, efficient, increases productivity in your company, is obviously ChatGPT and Copilot. And then you can say, okay, then what do we need? And can I use the free ChatGPT online? And I would say it depends, because ChatGPT free is a very, very useful tool to some extent, but you need to be very mindful around what type of data you type into it, especially because the ownership of the data then belongs to OpenAI if you type it into the free one. So you definitely need to investigate if you go with a free version, or if you want to move more towards an enterprise version where you can start closing down things a little bit and put some guardrails on it. Then looking at Copilot, that is something that enables you to actually host one of these bots in your own ecosystem. And what is really interesting with Copilot and some of the tools I'll show you in a second is that you can now start building your own data on top, and you can start building very, very smart solutions, super easy. But right now, what we see as the most efficient tools to get out there with very little, you could say, work on the employees in the company is definitely these chatbots. And it's good for, getting you started on, for example, report writing. If you are sitting with an idea, but it might not be your field, so you need some help on theory, then it will give you a lot of great starting points. And I think you don't need to invent as many things as you move along in your everyday tasks anymore. You can get a really good starting point here. Then showing you a couple of examples of how we actually use some of this technology in our company. I brought two examples. The first one we call the bunker bot. It's actually an agent made with a Copilot that consists of many different types of agents. And if you look at our company, we are very customer centric, and I believe that you are probably the same in your company. So it's all about how do you actually onboard new employees, current employees into the customers you have, and make sure that they give the absolutely best customer experience. And what we did was simply we tied these bots in a very safe ecosystem up to all the data that was out there. And within very, very, very few days, we were able to scrape internet, our own data, and then made an agent where you could actually ask questions about a customer. So that you could give the absolutely best customer experience, especially when you engage with them the first time around. And this works for everyone. So it's super simple. I'll show you a very high level example of how you do it in the next slide. Moving to the right, this is what we call TermsBot. It's a shortened version of terms and conditions. This is one of the things that generative AI is very good at today. Within a few days, you can create agents that are able to compare documents, highlight issues within documents, and that's why these type of solutions are very heavily used in HR functions, legal functions today. And whenever you, for example, buy service from a lawyer and they need to review, let's say, a contract on your house. They have systems for all of this today. So there's very, very little human touch with reviewing contracts and comparing to standards and things like that. And we will see this happen more and more in the future. For us, we have made a very, very simple case where we wanted to basically focus on giving our customers the best possible deal under the right terms and conditions. So we simply go in and compare terms, and it highlights then what is the customer asking for, and then what can the supplier then deliver compared to those terms and conditions. That's not something where we define anything at all. It's simply comparing. This is an example that took us approximately 1 person 2 days to build, just to give you some sort of an idea about the size. Then moving a little bit forward, I don't want to go too much into details, but it is very simple. What you need is a place to put your information, your data, no matter if it's in cloud or on-premise, doesn't really matter. You put it in one central place. You can go out and buy tools like Copilot Studio, and then you can basically, through no coding at all, configure agents that allows you to tap into that data and make sense of it towards users. So this requires very, very little effort. Then moving a little bit forward to the part where you then say, okay, but what are the value propositions in my company, and how can I accelerate the adoption of whatever we find? We have taken the approach of using design thinking within our company to make sure that whatever we do is based on smart decisions. So what we do is that we go out and do discovery, talk to our teams, and then get to know what are their pain points, what are the challenges, what are the potential. Then you mature the ideas. You look at, is the business case there? Is the technology available to solve for it? Then you move into prototyping. So you do one of these 2 days things to say, okay, can I actually get something out of it? And then we test directly. So get actual user feedback on your agents, because you don't want to end up having 1,000 agents to maintain in your company without getting any real value out of it. And then lastly, if it turns out to actually be a valuable use case, we move into to the actual development, and then it turns into a product that moves into normal development, right? And you can say, how easy is it and how efficient is it? I wanted to give a couple of examples here. We did about a year ago, we did 4 workshops. We found 80 ideas in those 4 workshops, which is quite a lot. And then we took 10 of them and matured them so that they were in a state where we could actually present them to some of our senior members of the organization, so that they could be co-partners in developing it, but also taking the ownership of the solutions. We decided to take 3 of them, and we made a big difference doing so. But what are the core themes that we found? It's still a lot around automation. It's still a lot around accuracy, efficiency, and productivity. And I think that to some extent explains very well where we are with some of these technologies right now. But it's moving so fast, and we will see within the next half a year, that they evolve into a place where we can start doing game-changing things. I think that's a great transition into current and future AI trends, and what do we see out there. As I said, right now, it's a lot about how do we read and handle documents, how can we easily access data and make sense of data through these type of agents, and that's very much where a lot of value lies right now. Of course, you can put in large efforts into projects that will make more value with more complex solutions with artificial intelligence, but then it's quite heavy investments for the organization. And not all organizations have the size where they want to go down that path. So it's whatever I've said today is very mindful that this is something that fits for organizations spanning from 10 to thousands of people. Then I think we will very soon start to see quality control, very much what Steffen talked about earlier. That is something we will start to see AI becoming very good at making sure that we apply to or not. In the near future, right now, it's also a little bit dependent on how fast the industry move in terms of creating standards and implementing standards so that we ensure we have a common language. And then after that is, once we have a common language, how do we start to get a good quality of data within our companies so we can start doing these quality controls. But this is something that is within a very, very near future, if not already happening. Then automation, risk management is something that we already start to see trends around. Algorithmic trading is something that is starting to use these type of technologies, moving a little bit more into to the horizon. When we are in a world where we will have a lot of standards, we will start seeing ecosystems pop up where vessel owners share some data with ports or terminals, and you will see track and trace, just like you do with postal, happening with ships or whatever cargo we transport. Then we will start to see that we can predict more future behaviors happening and look at weather situations. Where are the best port to enter based on those weather conditions, and what fuel is available in that port if you need to fuel your ship, and potentially even at what price. So a lot of things will happen within the near future once we start to get to a level where data can be shared across ecosystems. And then if we look a little bit further out into the future, then we will start to see what you could say is self-floating ships on the water. It will come, it will happen, it makes sense. And then the whole industry will change quite a lot. So I think you can expect a journey where we will see a lot of internally focused things happening within near future. Then we will start to see physical changes in the environment and in the way we act within the environment more long term in the future. So it's really very, very interesting what's going to happen. And we can already see now across the industry that associations are popping up, standards are starting to come out there, both within suppliers, ship owners. So these things are slowly starting to form. So it's not as far away as we might think. So I think I want to wrap it up there, Dimitris, and hopefully this sparked some thoughts with people, and they can, of course, reach out to us to learn a lot more, right?
It sure did. I mean, it's a fascinating topic for sure. We already have some questions. Since we are at this slide, I think it's there are a couple of questions how AI can be used in shipping and how is the industry adapting so far, what programs are used, what will be developed, and how is it implemented. I mean, if we rephrase these questions, maybe is that where are we now? Is it the trends or what you're saying, the milestones we're looking at our screen now? Are they already in place, or is still in a theory basis? What are we using now in AI, and what we will see in the future when it comes to do with shipping?
It's already here. I think the maturity level across the industry is it differs quite a lot. Some companies are already very digital. We see especially in on the container ship part, IoT is here. A lot of data is available. We see some of the carriers having quite digital ships. They even have cameras on the engines. So a lot of data is starting to become available. It's starting to be collected, which means that you can start adopting these technologies to make sense of it. So it is here, and we will probably see examples out there where they have already now started to use AI, for example, to whenever we do refrigeration of containers and ships, right? How do we make sure that we catch problems up front so that we can maintain them and avoid issues happening? We will already see scenarios there where AI is being used, or at least tested out, if it can help us catch problems a lot sooner than normally. Mm-hmm. I think the thing we need to be mindful of is that AI is, as you can say, a part of the data science practice. And machine learning has been around for some time now, and a lot of the things that we see will be also approached with machine learning, right? So how can we train data and make good decisions on data in the future, and that goes for example route voyage planning, etc. So it's a little bit blurry right now how we use these technologies and when we use them, and I think people are a little bit in the experimentation phase out there.
So we're talking about revisiting statistics, but now with much better calculative power, right? We have more tools to actually explore bigger data, if I understand correctly. How do you recommend companies get started with AI? Is a question. That's a good question. How do they begin if somebody is?
I would definitely say start small. Start with these tools that are available. Educate your employees on using these chatbots, for example, how to use them in your organization and which technologies do you want to use depending on what data you want to put in there. That's a super easy thing to get started with, no matter which maturity level you are at. Then maybe start bringing in some of these low-code technologies like Copilot that requires one person, maybe two, and then you're up and running. And then you can start building small solutions for your company. So I definitely recommend for people that are not very companies not very familiar working with data, that they take that approach where they kind of mature it as they move along and prove the value of the products they build using this technology.
Mm-hmm. And do you recommend, one more question, being a front runner or a follower when it comes to adopting AI in companies?
I would definitely say that it depends on what your focus is. Are you a very digital first company? Try to be a front runner, try to innovate, because it will give you a lot of benefits. It will make you very competitive. I think if you are a smaller company where you want to optimize internal processes and make smarter decisions very easily, then be a fast follower. Use some of these low-code tools and online available tools that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you something on that? Because we all see that there is a lot of pressure and for many companies and for the management of the companies to catch up and to get on board of that train called AI and to use it somewhere. The question is, just because we can, should we? I mean, are there cases that the company will not benefit from AI just because we have a hammer? Let's not look everything as a nail. Or you think it's inevitable for every company, regardless the size or the type of business, in one way or another?
I would say it really comes down to having a good process around how you discover these ideas and how you implement them, right? Because I think everyone should put some effort into it, but make sure that you do it in the right pace and in the right way. So definitely try to put a good process up around it where you put very little effort into discovery, building small solutions, and then try to see if there's actual value in it. And then you can always scale from there. So I would always suggest to have a more, you would say, explorative process around it, but don't just go big bang and then hire 10 engineers and now we need to do a lot of AI, because it as you said, it might not make sense.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing before we wrap up. We're talking about all the positive, but we have seen, especially in our industry, and that there have been cases of fraud. Let's say recreating invoices in the past that with wrong bank details sent to buyers and making payment on their fraudulent bank accounts. Are things going to get worse or more difficult now that there are more tools and really mostly available to people? And what can we do about it?
I think it's gonna be very hard in the future for multiple reasons. As we see standards starting to rise, we will start to see standards around these things. Then we will start to see ecosystems where all the things that is not competitive, but actually is something everyone has to do, like making sure that you are compliant, that you don't do sanctioned deals. That's not something that is a competitive advantage. It's something that you just have to do. And ecosystems will start to share that information, which means that you will have a lot stronger data foundation behind it. And ultimately, that means that it will be very hard to do these things in the future, because then you can apply these technologies on top, right? And then you can make sense of the information that you get. So I strongly believe that looking some years ahead, it will be very, very hard to be non-compliant in the industry, and it will be very hard to do fraud.
And with that, we are closing this segment. Thank you very much, Arne. A lot of things to think about for sure, and it's a very interesting topic, and that we will see every day to take more of our interest and the time. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, this brings us to the end of today's webinar, Beyond the Hype, Insights for 2025. A huge thank you to our speakers, Arne Rasmussen, Steffen Kortegaard, and Butzbach, for the insightful presentations, and to all of you for joining us today and for contributing with your questions. We will also be sharing the webinar recording soon, so you can revisit when you want, or you can share it with your team. Please do monitor our Glander LinkedIn page for updates on when it will be available. Once again, thank you for joining us today. If we didn't get to your question or you would like to continue a discussion offline, feel free to reach out at Glander International Bankering or connect with us at events@gibankering.com. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care and have a great day ahead. Thank you.